Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode here at the Graphic Library. Today I will be reviewing the Gwenpool Omnibus. Just quickly, the contents of this book, it has quite a few different things in it. So it has material from How the Duck in 2015, issues 1 to 3. It has the Unbelievable Gwenpool series, 1 to 25, which is the main series we'll be talking about. It has the Gwenpool Holiday Special, Rocket Raccoon and Groot, 8 to 10. Champions, issue 5, West Coast Avengers, 1 to 10, which is the whole run of that series. Superior Spider-Man, 7 to 8. Gwenpool Strikes Back, 1 to 5, which we'll also talk a little bit about, and then a few other extras. As for what I'll be covering in this video, I'll talk briefly about the history of the character as well as the premise of the character. Okay, so where she comes from and what her deal is. Then I'll mainly be talking about that main Unbelievable Gwenpool series, the 25 issues, with some of the other things sprinkled in here and there, especially some of the crossovers. But I'll be sticking to the main story and actually be using that as a springboard to talk about things such as fourth wall breaking, writing characters, and meta stories, which is, what Gwenpool is. So who is Gwenpool and where does she come from? Well, this is one of the most modern runs that I have in my collection, and Gwenpool first appeared in comic books in 2015. It was actually, she was just a one-off variant cover for this big event that Marvel was having. It's called Secret Wars. So they was having this big event in 2015, and because it was a big event, they want to sell a lot of comics, so they make lots of variant covers, right? And one of them was this, basically, and it was just a one-off picture. There was a spoof between Gwen Stacy from Spider-Man and Deadpool, okay, and it was just one cover, and that's all it was meant to be. But then fans were so receptive of this, so interested in this character that was made as for this variant cover, that they just showed that they really liked her and wanted to know more about her, and then Marvel decided to roll the dice a little bit and create a character out of that. Now this was very much a roll of the dice. And Marvel didn't give her her own book straight away. So the character of Gwendolyn Poole, which is her full name, was first introduced in How the Duck, which is its own separate book. Which is its own separate book. Okay, also a great book. Now, okay, so this character was invented as a crossover between Gwen Stacy and Deadpool, but that was only for the variant cover, and very much became her own character removed from those two in How the Duck in her own story. As for the premise of this character, she does display the ability to break the fourth wall, and this actually comes from the fact that she's actually not native to the Marvel universe, but actually from our universe, allegedly, right? And she's a comic book reader, okay? So she has a lot of knowledge of the history of comic books, of the tropes of comic books, of secret identities and that sort of thing. And she uses that knowledge to basically survive. So knowledge of secret identities and comic book tropes to survive in the Marvel universe when she's taken there. Now the way that she uses knowledge, she's very open about it, and a lot of other characters think she's crazy, as per. But yeah, she doesn't try to hide the fact that she knows all these things, and she talks openly about being in a comic book, a bit too openly. Also, we see that her knowledge is limited and imperfect, and things don't always work out the way that she expects them to. For example, she thinks that this person is Madam Hydra, but it's then corrected as actually she's just another woman who works for Hydra with brown hair. So it's it's a limited type of fourth wall breaking, which I think is really interesting, rather than just like knowing everything at all times. She's also quite irresponsible with this knowledge and with how she handles it initially. So basically the thing she does is based off this knowledge, but also her perception of this knowledge, right? So she instantly thinks she's a good guy and that everything she does will contribute to that, but her in-universe actions are actually quite negative, and there are repercussions for that. A great example of this is actually in the very first issue of her own story. So we're into the Unbelievable Gwenpool now, issue 1, where because she thinks she's some sort of main character, which technically she is, of this book, she thinks she's untouchable, and those around her, which she chooses to for them to be her sidekick, they're untouchable as well. This is what she believes based on what she reads, but actually that's not how it pans out. Because of her pride and self-involvement and her thinking she's some sort of important character, her sidekick is actually killed by MODOK, which she obviously wasn't expecting, because she and her people around her are supposed to be protected, as per the rules of the story. But that's because while she's reading these comic books, MODOK is some sort of joke villain, right? Written off, whatever. He's sort of the cannon fodder. He's a big floating baby head with little arms, whatever. But actually in universe, he's quite scary and quite deadly and kills people. And this is the first reality check for Gwenpool, as she recognizes that she might be main character of this book, but she's still small and insignificant in the wider universe. And also she's a new character who doesn't carry as much weight as someone as even like MODOK. And she's relegated to, instead of main character or hero, she's actually henchman on the villain side of things. So this is where things get quite complex when it comes to fourth wall breaking. The danger of fourth wall breaking is relying too heavily on it, and being lazy with character and lazy with narrative. And this is a danger a lot of writers run into, especially with Deadpool, because he's sort of the poster boy for fourth wall breaking. Deadpool has a lot of really great books out there, and then a lot which are just a bit nothing, because it relies too heavily on fourth wall breaking as the spotlight, as the main center point. But I actually don't think that this meta narrative is enough to be its own spotlight. I think its fourth wall breaking is best used when it's there to support character and to support story in interesting ways. So you still need to work at those two things. And that's a big reason why I really, really like this book, because right at the beginning we have our own expectations as well as Gwenpool's expectations subverted as to what this fourth wall breaking knowledge entails. And it creates this internal conflict for the character, which she then must overcome. And she does that by continually to, yes, grow in her fourth wall breaking skills, but also to grow as a character and find her own place in the universe and in this story. And I think that makes a really compelling narrative as compared to just a constant barrage of meta jokes or fourth wall breaking shenanigans, right? So the basis for the beginning of this book is that Gwen is recruited into this band of mercenaries led by MODOK. Okay, and here we have the introduction of the supporting cast of characters, most of whom are created just for this story, but we have one who is a recurring villain. So off the bat we have Cecil, who is a ghost, and he's actually the sidekick from before who got killed by MODOK. So I guess he's not dead. And we also have a Doombot who sort of comes and goes, a really interesting character. We have Tony, who's sort of the tech guy on the team. We have Sarah, who is the magic girl on the team. And then we have Batroc the Leaper. Batroc is actually a long-time Captain America villain. And he was actually in Captain America 2: The Winter Soldier. Very briefly, he likes to kick, and he's French. And that is the extent of his character, really, in his entire history, up until this book, I would say. A lot of interactions that Gwen has with Batroc the Leaper are more examples of why I think the fourth wall breaking in this book is done really well. So as I said before, Gwen is quite open with the fact that she's from a different universe and that she knows, things that she shouldn't know. And this opens into a conversation with Batroc where he actually refutes her and say, oh, look, if this is a comic book, in stories, people get their happy ending. So where's my happy ending? He's like, this is the real world. Otherwise, I would have a happy ending. And then Gwen's like, well, actually, you're the villain to Captain America. And just right there, you have, the framework of a fourth wall breaking, of meta narrative. But because of that, we instantly get, a lot deeper into the character of Batroc and how he views himself, right? Because he isn't some sort of, big end of the world villain. He's just like a fun rob bank sometimes villain. Verbal joust at Captain America, then get away. That sort of thing. So yeah, it's just interesting how, the fourth wall breaking conversations open up this deeper understanding of these characters, which I think, again, is what I'm talking about when I say this book does fourth wall breaking really well. Just to get back to the story, so that we can keep moving along, Gwen eventually defeats MODOK and becomes the boss of this mercenary group with all her friends now. She goes on a few adventures. She meets Miles Morales' Spider-Man. They fight for a bit, but then they're friends. She meets Rocket Raccoon and Groot, and they fight for a bit, but then they're friends. She meets the champions, who are a group of young superheroes. They fight for a bit, but then it's alright because they become friends. And then she meets Hawkeye, Kate Bishop Hawkeye, and Ghost Rider. And they fight for a bit and they become friends. So she has a lot of friends now. But here you see one of the... and she doesn't, being a fourth wall breaking character, she actually doesn't say anything about this. But a big thing that happens in comic books, right, is when you cross over between different stories, there's always this sort of, they punch for a bit and then their mates mentality, which is just a bit samey, I think. And you can tell interesting stories around that, but usually these are just, one or two issues. And it's a bit, well, why are they always punching? Getting back to the story again, we have a really fun arc where Gwen and the mercenary gang go on this really fun RPG style dungeon crawling quest, where they have a bit of an adventure there. And here, very excitingly, we have the long expected interaction between Gwenpool and Deadpool. Okay, and here we see some really interesting conversations that they have while fighting, to do with, again, how they're both fourth wall breakers, but they approach that differently. I think a fun thing was Gwen saying that she doesn't like Deadpool because she talks too much and his balloons cover all of the artwork, which is I think fair. Another thing is that another fun thing is just like she doesn't know how to beat Deadpool because she doesn't read Deadpool because she doesn't like it. Okay, which I think is, again, it's showing how she's limited in her fourth wall breaking to what she knew when she was reading comics. I think another, and this one is a bit more of a reality check moment. So the second one that Gwenpool has, the second big one, where, basically she is the main character of this book. She can recognize that. And again, this makes her a bit more self-involved, a bit more prideful. But Deadpool is saying, look, I've been around for decades. People love me. I have my own movie starring Ryan Reynolds. Nobody even knows who you are. People still think that you're Gwen Stacy from Spider-Man. And then this idea of, because he's such a big name and she's such a nobody, relatively, the law of comic books is that she can't beat him, right? And then she's resigned to that. But then, of course, they team up because how do things go? They punch for a bit and then they're mates. At the midpoint way of Unbelievable Gwenpool, we have this really fascinating episode, beginning of this arc, where Gwenpool actually seemingly goes back to her own universe. And here we see a lot more development of her knowledge of what's going on, how she got to the Marvel Universe, as well as some actual abilities. Now this arc is a little confusing because there are a few things going on at the same time, but basically Gwen is back in time to before she went into the Marvel Universe, and she has the opportunity to go back. The same things happen, but this time she is stopped. And it's like, oh, okay, well, what does that mean if we're rewriting history? That sort of thing. But this ends up being a ploy, and actually all of this is some sort of illusion, pocket dimension stuff. But here we see Gwen is able to understand her abilities more and sort of develop the fourth wall breaking and go from just knowledge to actual abilities. A really good example of this is she's able to interact with things in the comic book that don't exist in the universe. For example, like this The End sign is something physical for her, where it's actually just something for us, the readers. So she can see that imprinted there and she can interact with that freely. She also is able to identify the borders of panels and sort of reach through that. And this, as we see, develops later into a very complex relationship between time and space in comic books, because there is no time in comic books. There's no passage of time. It's actually passage of space. So she's able to go through time by interacting throughout the space on the page, if that makes sense. And we can see her breaking these borders and actually doing this thing that we call going into the gutter space. So the gutter space is the space in between the panels, in between the pages. It's basically the in-between of the comic book format, and she's able to do that. And we see again the beginning of these abilities that are fleshed out more in this story, which are done really, really well. So in the gutter space, she's able to actually traverse in between the panels and the pages of the comic books, and interact with things from the past or even the future. We can see her here picking up a mask from someone else and putting that on, and she's actually able to more fully use this fourth wall breaking in terms of abilities. later we see that this whole instance to do with her going back to her original universe was constructed from a few people from the future, including Miles Morales Spider-Man as an adult, the Doombot from earlier, who's one of her friends, and also Sarah, the magician, who's also one of her friends, and they're all out to get her, and we don't exactly know why yet. But again, yeah, she's able to escape into the gutter, away from them. So that's, again, a really interesting use of these abilities, where she can, in this meta-narrative, go in between the pages of the comic books. And it's not a place where they can follow her. It is revealed to us and also to Gwen that the reason why these three are after her and trying to eliminate her in the past is because in the future she goes the route of full villain. She exposes the identities of a bunch of heroes, a bunch of people die, and war ensues. And this directly affects Spider-Man, for example. So that is what's revealed to us. And Gwen's she's like, oh, I would never do that. But then her imagining this, or seeing the flashback rather, brings evil future Gwen to the present. Okay, so now we have two Gwens, and they both sort of escape into the gutter space where they can talk and sort of hash things out. And they actually use this gutter space as a in a very interesting visual representation of that time and space, especially across comic book pages. The evil Gwen basically went evil because that's the only way that her character could survive, because the readers, that's us, don't really like seeing, or were bored by the good Gwen, and eventually they stopped writing stories about her, right? But an evil Gwen, that's more interesting, that's what the readers like, so Marvel kept writing stories about her, and she basically has an infinite amount of pages to live on, right? So here we see the potential death of a comic book character, but rather than in story, in print, which is something that a lot of characters wrestle with and go through. You have your Captain Americas, your Iron Mans, your Spider-Mans, who basically have a running series since their inception, right? Or if they don't, they have small breaks early on, but now they're like going strong. A lot of characters aren't like that. You have whole teams, like for example, Alpha Flight, right? Well, the Canadian superhero team. When was the last time they had, an ongoing series of books, right? Or you have individual characters like Howard the Duck, like I mentioned earlier, who had almost 20 years of, not having his own book and only popping up here and there. So you have these characters who, rather than live and die, in the book, they live and die in print. And this is something that the character of Gwenpool is faced with. And of course, she doesn't go the villainous route. And because of her immediate decision in the present, the future Gwenpool fades from existence. Okay, so I guess she wasn't living on in print as much as she thought. But the tail end of this book, the last maybe 10 issues or so, is to do with Gwen being faced with this reality, this knowledge of, if she continues as the good character or how she's going, she will become irrelevant and not have any titles to sell, and she'll end up dying or not living in print. So the next few arcs are to do with her trying to be relevant in different ways. Now in the back end of this series, we see Gwen becoming a lot more accustomed to her abilities and more ready to use them. So here she's able to throw a supervillain into the gutter space as a way of defeating him. And she, again, with that background knowledge of needing to stay relevant, she seeks out Doctor Doom, the biggest bad in Marvel Universe, arguably. I would say so. At the very least, he's the best bad. But yeah, seeking out Doctor Doom and being like, okay, well, if I defeat Doctor Doom, I'll be relevant. I'll be relevant. B, I can join the Avengers, right? Because the Avengers are always in print, aren't they? So it's again that idea of like finding ways to, in universe, stay relevant. How do you do that? Well, join a super team, right? Join the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, the X-Men, these teams who, haven't really had a big break since when they started, all right? So yeah, she goes seeking out Doctor Doom. Unfortunately for her, At this point, Doctor Doom is actually a good guy, and he's the superior Iron Man. So that doesn't really go well for her, but she still seeks him out, engages him in this battle, and they both end up in this gutter space again, which is a place where a lot of the meta philosophical ideas live. So that's where they have a lot of those conversations, and they can sort of relate on this idea of being limited in the way that they are now, because Doctor Doom, right? He's a good guy at this point. How long is Doctor Doom gonna stay a good guy? You know, in these comics, very very seldom do big character moments or moments of growth or change happen for an extended period of time. Things always get reverted back to the status quo. Doctor Doom realizes this, and Gwen realizes this about him as well, so they can sort of bond over that. But Gwen can, now that she's looking in this meta space, in this gutter space, sorry, she can actively see the pages running out. So she's getting more and more desperate to do something. But this is just a big moment where, this one big thing that she tried, defeating Doctor Doom, joining the Avengers, it's not worked out. Another moment where we see Gwen trying to extend her lifetime is when, and this is a bit of a moment of resignation for her, but not all the way. She goes back to Batroc the Leaper, her friend from earlier on, and they complete this heist together, right? And she's like tiptoeing into villainy, and it's not that sort of like grand evil villainy, the more sort of like robber bank villainy, which is still bad from my point of view, but it's not like super villain, I would say. So she goes to do this with him. Here we see a cool moment where they have to get into somewhere without making any noise, and Batroc, he starts kicking and all that to get into this safe door, but he doesn't make any sound because Gwen's able to like catch the onomatopoeia, which I thought was pretty cool. And again, you see like there are still like creative flares of this fourth wall breaking and playing with the format of comics, and this whole back end of the run is how is Gwen extending her time in comics, but it's not hitting you over the head with it every single panel, and it does it in interesting ways, and it does it to, as I said before, deepen the characters and propel the story in insightful ways. So I just really enjoy the fourth wall breaking in this. So Gwen is leaning into villainy, but it turns out Batroc, who cares for Gwen and doesn't want to see her go down this route, not knowing that she's trying to extend her life, made it so they're robbing a different supervillain. So it wasn't even villainy to start with. So again, it's another failed attempt. I want to spend a bit of time here talking about this panel, because I think again it's another creative way of using the fourth wall breaking to explore character and also think about the wider comic industry. So here we see Gwen getting emotional because she's going to be leaving Batroc, and probably for the last time. But she's getting emotional because she recognizes that after her run finishes, which she knows is soon, he'll go back to being the sort of joke of a character who just gets beaten on by Captain America, very two-dimensional. That sort of Batroc the Leaper, and not this sort of three-dimensional character with perspectives and ambitions and an actual character. And this is something, and like I said, this book deals with the death of characters, not in narrative but in other ways, really well. So we have sort of characters living out of print, or we could say characters dying out of print. This is another one, and I think it's one that a lot of people who read comics resonate with. It's this idea of, every time a character is written by a new writer, it's, in a way, it's a different character every time, right? It's never the same. Spider-Man has been written by, I would say hundreds of people in his publication, and each time, they're bringing something different to the character. They characterize him differently. He interacts with his environments differently. He has different goals, different ambitions, different beliefs. And all of these are grounded, yes, of course, in the core character of Spider-Man, for example, or Captain America, or any character you choose. They're all grounded in the core, but the way that's executed is different depending on the writer. And each time it creates a sort of new character. Batroc has never been written as in-depth as this in his decades of publication. And yeah, she was right. Like right after this, he goes back to being a whatever character. And you know, as a fourth wall breaker, she can see that. She can see that coming with the end of her run, and she is actively mourning that. Because in the comics, right, that I would say this phenomenon is actually more lasting than death in comics. You know, very, very rarely do you have a character, even side characters, even D-list villains. Very rarely do you have one who dies in narrative and then stays dead, right? But if you have a well-written character who stops being written like that, well, they're not coming back like that. Okay. So yeah, I think again, it's using the fourth wall to just dig more deeply into character, into narrative, and the comic industry as a whole. Eventually, Gwenpool is visited by another future Gwenpool, but this one's a bit, not as evil, and they have a bit of a chat about what it means to reach the end of publication. And they again, okay, it's not that Gwenpool is running out of time, it's she's running out of space. So and that's such an interesting concept in comics, right? That there is no passage of time, right? It's all perceived. There is a physical passage of space though. Gwenpool recognizes this, and she uses the space that she has left, the 8 or so pages she has left, to do a lot with her time, and sort of jump through, do all these, tie up all the loose ends, that sort of thing, hang out with different people. So I think that's a really interesting way to end this story. There's this really nice moment where Gwenpool sees a little girl dressed up as her for Halloween, and then the older Gwenpool, she makes this comment, right? It's not about, it's not just about this publication. You'll come up in other series as a guest star. You'll have merchandise. Maybe there'll be a movie about you one day. You'll have other runs perhaps as limiteds, and they might be collected in an omnibus. Like these are the different ways that characters can live through in comics. I mean, this is what Gwenpool learns at the end, and is happy with this expansive future that she has. Now I'm going to talk quickly about the West Coast Avengers series, the 10 issues. This is going to be very brief. So the reason why this is in here is because Gwenpool is a supporting character. She's part of the team. And to me, I think the series itself is fine. Reading it off of the back of the Unbelievable Gwenpool series, I didn't like it very much because I don't think it's just as good. It's not as good in terms of what it is. But also it does regress Gwenpool's character a little bit. And you see this with Deadpool a lot as well. When he's put into team contexts, his fourth wall breaking abilities are scaled back, and it's more just the jokes and the knowledge, right? Which is sort of how Gwenpool started. So this isn't a problem that's exclusive to Gwenpool, but I just didn't really enjoy seeing her regress in her character and also in her abilities in this book to how she was in the beginning of the first series. I think that played a big part of me not liking the series as much. However, one thing that the West Coast Avengers series did give us was Jeff the Landshark, and he's great. It's worth reading for that. No, it's not. But it's still pretty good. It's not. It's fine. Okay, so after that, we get to Gwenpool Strikes Back, which is a big thing because it's another Gwenpool series, which is what she was looking for. This one's a limited series, so that means it's only 5 issues, while the other one was ongoing. So it didn't have a planned end. But this one is limited. And again, I think I enjoyed this one more than the West Coast Avengers, but it was very similar in that she finds out, again, breaking the fourth wall. She's with Deadpool as well, I think. She finds out that the audience liked her better as a villain. Sales were up when she was being villainous. Whether that's causation or correlation, I couldn't tell you, mainly because I don't understand what those two words mean. But she finds that out, and then she goes the route of villainy, despite everything in the first series. And again, it's not like this outright evil villain. more like a playful sort of nuisance villain, where she gathers all these heroes together on an island for like a battle royale, which is like a fun idea. But still, it's like those decisions she was making based on what she knew just seemed to contradict with the character growth in the previous series. So again, I felt like it was just this wasn't just retreading old ground, but it was sort of like going in face of what's happened earlier. So I didn't hugely. I think the series itself is fine. It's a bit fun. You get a huge array of characters, but I just feel like in terms of the character and the story, it's one of those where it's put the fourth wall breaking first, and then it's had those behind, and I don't think that's a good way to create a fourth wall breaking comic book. The first series for me is the absolute highlight. It's an absolute standout. And honestly, I think this book is worth picking up, worth reading just for that. The other little bits and pieces here and there, they're fine. Pretty fun, some of them. But the real jewel of this book and of the Gwenpool character is that 25 issue series written by Christopher Hastings, which is honestly phenomenal. Even just reading that is, I think, very, very worth it.